After 6 decades of life, you'd think the games would be over. You'd think the manipulation, the second guessing, the shrinking of yourself to fit someone else's vision would finally end. But here's what nobody tells you. Some of the most profound betrayals of self happen not in your 20s or 30s, but in your 60s and beyond, when you should know better, when you've earned the right to stand in your power, when your wisdom should be your shield. There's a 63-year-old woman I know. We'll call her Margaret. She spent 40 years building a successful career, raised 3 children, survived cancer, traveled the world alone, spoke 3 languages, and commanded respect in every room she entered. Then she met David at a charity event. Within 8 months, she had given up her art classes, stopped seeing her closest friends, began apologizing for her opinions, and found herself explaining her whereabouts like a teenager. When I asked her what happened, she said, "Something that haunts me. I thought I was being loving. I thought I was being a good partner. I thought at my age I should just be grateful someone wanted me." That sentence right there, that's the poison that society has been feeding us for generations, and it's time we spit it out. Welcome. If you're watching this video, you've already taken the most important step. You're questioning the narrative you've been sold about what it means to be a woman over 60 in a relationship. You're refusing to accept that your value diminishes with age, that your needs matter less, that you should be grateful for scraps of attention and affection. Before we dive deep into the 7 things you should never do for a man, I want to ask something of you. If this content resonates with you, if you find yourself nodding along, if you recognize yourself or someone you love in these words, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more women find this message. Comment below with your thoughts, your experiences, your wisdom, because your voice matters and other women need to hear it. Share this video with the women in your life who need to hear this truth. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in empowering women to live authentically at every age. And if you really want to support the work we're doing here, helping women reclaim their power and dignity, consider supporting this channel with super thanks. Every bit of support helps us continue creating content that challenges the status quo and empowers women like you. Now, let's get into it. Thing number 1. Never diminish your accomplishments to make him feel bigger. Let me tell you about Sandra. At 67, Sandra had just published her 3rd book, a memoir that was getting serious attention from literary critics. She met Robert at her book launch party. He was charming, attentive, well-read, or so she thought. On their 3rd date, when the conversation turned to her writing, she noticed something. Every time she mentioned her success, his jaw tightened slightly. When she talked about her upcoming speaking tour, he changed the subject. When a stranger at the restaurant recognized her and asked for an autograph, he made a joke about celebrity going to people's heads. Sandra, brilliant and perceptive in every other area of her life, made a choice that night. She decided to play smaller. At their next dinner with his friends, when someone asked what she did, she said, "Oh, I dabble in writing." Dabble. This woman who had spent 5 years pouring her soul into prose, who had received a prestigious literary award, who was being compared to Joan Didion, said she dabbled. Within 3 months, Sandra stopped mentioning her work entirely. She turned down interviews. She even considered canceling her book tour. Why? Because she had internalized a toxic belief that her success made her less feminine, less desirable, less worthy of love. Here's what psychology tells us about this phenomenon. Research from the University of Virginia found that men with fragile egos often engage in what psychologists call achievement deflation with their partners. They subtly, sometimes unconsciously, communicate that their partner's success threatens them. And here's the devastating part. Women, especially those of us who grew up in eras when we were explicitly taught to defer to men, are highly attuned to these signals. We've been trained since childhood to make ourselves smaller, quieter, less impressive to accommodate male comfort. Dr. Susan Fiske, a Princeton psychologist who has studied competence and warmth in social perception for decades, found that successful women face a unique double bind. When we display competence, we're often perceived as less warm, less likable, less desirable as partners. So we compensate by downplaying our achievements, by adding qualifiers and diminishing language to our accomplishments, by actively working to seem less threatening. But here's what that does to us. When you consistently diminish your accomplishments, you're not just lying to him, you're lying to yourself. You're rewiring your brain to believe that your success is something to be ashamed of, something to hide, something that makes you less worthy of love rather than more. The neuroscience of this is fascinating and heartbreaking. Every time you downplay your accomplishments, your brain releases less dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pride and achievement. Over time, this creates a neural pattern where your achievements literally bring you less joy. You've conditioned yourself to feel anxiety instead of pride, shame instead of celebration. Think about what you're modeling. If you have daughters, granddaughters, younger women who look up to you, what are you teaching them? That success must be hidden, that a man's comfort is more important than a woman's truth, that love requires self-erasure. And let's talk about the kind of man who needs you to be smaller. Psychologist Dr. Craig Malkin, who specializes in narcissism and relationships, explains that secure, healthy men are not threatened by their partner's success. In fact, they celebrate it. They feel pride in their partner's accomplishments. They want to tell everyone about the amazing woman in their life. A man who needs you to dim your light is a man who has accepted that his own light is too weak to shine on its own. The late Dr. Harriet Lerner, who wrote extensively about women and self-esteem, put it this way: when we make ourselves small to make someone else comfortable, we're not being kind. We're being complicit in our own diminishment. Here's a truth that might be hard to hear. If your success threatens him, he's not secure enough to be your partner. Full stop. You don't need to shrink. He needs to grow. And if he's not willing to do that work, if he's not willing to examine why your achievements make him uncomfortable, then he's asking you to pay the price for his insecurity. That's not love. That's exploitation. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're sitting across from your 20-year-old self, that young woman who was just starting out, who had dreams and ambitions, who faced a world that told her at every turn that she couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. What would you tell her? Would you say, work hard, achieve your dreams, but when you're older and you finally have the success you've always wanted, hide it to make a man comfortable? Of course not. You'd tell her to be proud, to stand tall, to never apologize for being excellent. So why are you not giving yourself that same advice now? Sandra's story has a postscript. After 6 months of making herself smaller, she had dinner with her oldest friend, a woman who had known her since college. Her friend looked at her across the table and said, "I don't recognize you anymore. Where's the woman who told our professor he was wrong in front of the entire class? Where's the woman who backpacked through Asia alone at 40? Where's the woman who turned down a corporate job because she wouldn't compromise her integrity?" Sandra started crying right there in the restaurant. The next day, she ended things with Robert. 6 months later, she met Thomas at a literary festival. The first thing he said to her was, "I've read all your books. You're brilliant. Tell me everything about your process." They've been together for 4 years now, and he still introduces her as the best writer I know. Your accomplishments are not negotiable. They're not up for discussion. They're not something you need to apologize for or minimize or hide. They're proof of your resilience, your intelligence, your dedication, your excellence. Any man worth having in your life will celebrate them, not feel threatened by them. Remember, you're not bragging when you acknowledge your achievements. You're stating facts. You're honoring the work you've done, the obstacles you've overcome, the excellence you've achieved. And if that makes a man uncomfortable, that's valuable information. It tells you exactly who he is and what he's capable of offering you. Thing number 2, never abandon your friendships to prioritize his need for attention. This one is insidious because it happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you wake up and realize you haven't spoken to your best friend in 3 months. You've missed 6 book club meetings and you can't remember the last time you had coffee with the women who have known and loved you for decades. Patricia was 62 when she met James on a cruise. After 30 years of marriage, she had been widowed for 4 years. She had built a beautiful life in that time. Tuesday mornings were for her watercolor class with 3 other women artists. Wednesday evenings were dinner and bridge with her closest friends from college. Thursday afternoons were volunteering at the library with her friend Susan. Weekends were for her grandchildren, long phone calls with her sister, and sometimes spontaneous road trips with her adventure club. James seemed to respect all of this at first. He'd drop her off at her watercolor class, wave at her friends when he picked her up from bridge night. But gradually, things shifted. He'd schedule last-minute plans on Tuesday mornings. He'd suggest they do something, just the 2 of them. On Wednesday evenings, he'd make comments about how much time she spent with her friends. Nothing overtly controlling, just gentle suggestions. Don't you want to spend time with me? I thought we could have dinner, just us. You just saw Susan last week. Within a year, Patricia had effectively isolated herself. She told herself she was just being considerate, that relationships require compromise, that it was selfish to prioritize her friends over her partner. Her watercolor class ended, and she didn't sign up for the next session. She started missing bridge nights, then stopped going altogether. Her friends would call, and she'd cut the conversation short because James was waiting for her. Here's what's crucial to understand from a psychological perspective. Female friendships are not a luxury. They are not optional extras in your life. They are essential to your mental health, your emotional well-being, your physical health, and even your longevity. Dr. Shelley Taylor at UCLA conducted groundbreaking research on what she calls the tend and befriend response in women. While men have a fight-or-flight response to stress, women have evolved a different mechanism. We seek out other women. We connect, we support, we nurture. And this isn't just a nice social behavior. It's a biological imperative that has profound effects on our health. The research is staggering. The Harvard Nurses' Health Study, which followed thousands of women over decades, found that women without close friends had a significantly higher risk of developing physical and mental health problems and had mortality rates equivalent to smoking or being overweight. The absence of female friendship was literally as dangerous as major health risk factors. But it goes deeper. Studies from the University of California found that time spent with female friends actually changes our brain chemistry. When women interact with close female friends, their bodies release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, and even helps heal emotional wounds. Your friendships are medicinal. Dr. Ruth Ellen Josselson, who has studied female friendship for over 30 years, found that women derive different kinds of emotional support from friends than from romantic partners. Friends provide validation, mirroring, understanding that comes from shared experience. No matter how wonderful your partner is, he cannot give you what your female friends give you. He hasn't lived in a woman's body. He hasn't navigated the world as a woman. He doesn't share the cultural and social reference points that your friendships are built on. And here's something that should make you pay attention. Research from the University of Michigan found that women who abandon their friendships for romantic relationships are at significantly higher risk of depression and anxiety. Why? because you've put all your emotional eggs in one basket. You've made one person responsible for all your emotional needs, social needs, validation needs, support needs. That's not fair to him, and it's dangerous for you. Think about the pattern of abuse and control. Every expert on domestic violence and emotional abuse will tell you that isolation is one of the first warning signs. It starts subtly. A comment here, a suggestion there, a slight guilt trip. Over time, you find yourself cut off from your support system, from the people who know you best, from the people who would notice if something was wrong, from the people who would tell you the truth about your relationship. I'm not saying James was necessarily abusive, but I am saying that the pattern he encouraged, that Patricia participated in, is the same pattern that abusers use. Even if his intentions were innocent, even if he genuinely just wanted more time with her, the result was the same. Patricia was isolated, dependent, and vulnerable. Here's something else worth considering. Psychologist Dr. John Gottman, who has studied relationships for over 4 decades, found that one of the key predictors of relationship success is what he calls turning toward versus turning away from your partner's bids for connection. But he also found something else. Couples who maintain strong outside friendships and interests actually have healthier, more stable relationships. Why? Because they bring freshness, perspective, and vitality back into the relationship. They're not draining their partner dry emotionally. They're not expecting one person to be their everything. Your friendships have history. They have depth. They have shared memories and inside jokes and understanding that has been built over years, sometimes decades. These relationships have weathered storms with you. They've celebrated your triumphs and mourned your losses. They've seen you at your worst and loved you anyway. They knew you before him, and they'll know you after him if it comes to that. And let's be brutally honest, statistically, this relationship might not last. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm being realistic. Half of all marriages end in divorce. Dating relationships have even higher failure rates. If you've abandoned all your friendships for a man and that relationship ends, where are you? Alone. 60-something years old and alone, having to rebuild friendships that you let wither, having to explain to women who loved you why you disappeared, having to admit that you chose a man over them. Patricia's story has a redemptive arc, but it came at a cost. After 18 months with James, her daughter sat her down and showed her a list. "Mom," she said, "here are all the things you used to do, all the people you used to see, all the activities that made you happy. Look at this list. How many of these are still in your life?" Patricia looked at the list and started to cry. She had given up nearly everything that brought her joy, everything that made her who she was. She made a choice that day. She told James that she loved him, but that she needed to reconnect with her life, her friends, her activities. His response told her everything she needed to know. He was angry. He accused her of not caring about him. He said if she really loved him, she'd want to spend all her time with him. He gave her an ultimatum, him or them. She chose them, not because she didn't care about James, but because she realized that a man who would ask her to choose wasn't a man who truly loved her. A man who truly loved her would want her to be whole, to be happy, to be surrounded by people who enriched her life. It took Patricia almost a year to fully rebuild her friendships. Some of her friends welcomed her back with open arms. Others were hurt, needed time, needed explanations. She earned her way back into their lives by being consistent, by showing up, by being the friend she had failed to be during her time with James. Here's what I want you to understand. Maintaining your friendships while in a relationship isn't selfish, it's essential, it's healthy. It's the mark of a mature, balanced adult who understands that no one person can meet all your needs. Your partner should encourage your friendships, should be happy that you have people who love and support you, should recognize that you're a better partner, when you're a whole person with a full life. If a man is threatened by your friendships, ask yourself why. Is it because your friends see things about him that you're ignoring? Is it because your friends remind you of who you were before him, and he prefers the diminished version of you? Is it because he's insecure and needs to be the center of your universe? None of these are good reasons. You are over 60 years old. You have earned these friendships through years of loyalty, support, laughter, tears, and shared experience. These women have held your hand through divorces, deaths, diagnoses, and disappointments. They've celebrated your victories and validated your pain. They've told you the truth when you needed to hear it and lied to make you feel better when that's what you needed. They are treasures. They are not expendable. They are not negotiable. Make a promise to yourself right now. No man, no matter how charming or attentive or exciting, is worth losing the women who have been your foundation, your support system, your tribe. Prioritize your friendships. Protect them fiercely. Show up for your friends the way they've shown up for you. And if a man can't handle that, if he needs you isolated and dependent and solely focused on him, then he's not the right man. The right man will drive you to book club. The right man will ask about your friends and remember their names and their struggles. The right man will encourage you to take that girls' weekend trip. The right man will understand that you loving your friends doesn't mean you love him less. It means you're capable of deep, loyal, meaningful love, and he gets to be the beneficiary of that capacity for love. Thing number 3. Never ignore your intuition because he tells you you're overreacting. At 64, Eleanor had impeccable instincts. She had raised 4 children largely on her own after her husband passed away when the youngest was only 6. She had built a successful catering business from her kitchen table. She had navigated family dramas, financial crises, and health scares with a combination of practical wisdom and gut instinct that rarely steered her wrong. So when she met Martin and something felt off, she noticed small things. The way his stories about his past didn't quite line up. The way he was vague about his work. The way he seemed to have a lot of free time for someone who claimed to run a successful consulting business. The way he borrowed $20 here, $50 there, always with a promise to pay it back, which he never did. Eleanor mentioned these concerns. "There's something about him I can't quite put my finger on," she told her sister, but every time she raised a concern with Martin directly, he had the same response. "You're overreacting. You're too suspicious. You're reading too much into things. You're being paranoid. Why are you always looking for problems?" And because Eleanor wanted to be fair, because she wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, because she had been taught that good women are trusting and forgiving and not suspicious, she ignored her intuition. She told herself she was being silly. She told herself she was damaged from past relationships. She told herself she was too critical, too careful, too guarded. 18 months later, Eleanor discovered that Martin was married. He had a wife and 2 teenage children in another state. He had been running a long-distance con, courting multiple women, borrowing money that he never repaid, living off their generosity while maintaining his real life elsewhere. Eleanor had lent him over $15,000, money she would never see again. The kicker? When Eleanor confronted him with the evidence, his response was, "You're overreacting. It's not as bad as you think." This is gaslighting, and it's one of the most dangerous things you can allow in your life, because it doesn't just affect this relationship. It erodes your ability to trust yourself in all areas of your life. Dr. Robin Stern, who wrote the definitive book on gaslighting, describes it as a form of psychological manipulation in which one person makes another question their own reality, memory, and perceptions. The term comes from a 1944 film in which a husband manipulates his wife into believing she's going insane by dimming the gas lights and then denying that the lights are dimming when she points it out. Modern gaslighting is more subtle but no less damaging. When you express a concern and he tells you you're overreacting, that's gaslighting. When you notice something that doesn't add up and he makes you feel crazy for noticing, that's gaslighting. When your gut tells you something is wrong and he convinces you that your gut is faulty, that's gaslighting. Here's what the research tells us about female intuition. It's real, it's powerful, and it's usually right. Dr. Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist who has studied intuition for decades, explains that women have developed highly sophisticated skills for reading emotional cues, detecting dishonesty, and sensing danger. This isn't mystical, it's evolutionary. Women who could accurately assess whether a person was trustworthy or dangerous, who could pick up on subtle cues of deception or threat, were more likely to survive and protect their offspring. This ability has been honed over millions of years of evolution. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies using fMRI brain scans show that women have stronger connections between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which allows for better integration of logical analysis and emotional insight. When you have a gut feeling about something, you're not being irrational. You're processing hundreds of micro-signals, tiny inconsistencies in body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, story details, patterns of behavior. Your conscious mind may not be able to articulate exactly what's wrong, but your subconscious has already done the math. Dr. Gavin De Becker, who wrote The Gift of Fear, a landmark book on trusting your intuition for safety, puts it bluntly. Intuition is always right in at least two important ways. It is always in response to something, and it always has your best interest at heart. Think about that. Your intuition is not random. It's not irrational. It's not you being paranoid or damaged or difficult. It's your brain protecting you based on information it has gathered and processed. So when a man tells you you're overreacting, what he's really saying is, stop processing the information you're gathering. Stop trusting your own perception. Stop protecting yourself. Make me more comfortable by ignoring your discomfort. This is not love. This is manipulation. Dr. Henry Cloud, a clinical psychologist who specializes in boundaries and relationships, explains that one of the hallmarks of a healthy relationship is that both parties can express concerns without being made to feel crazy. In a healthy relationship, if you say something feels off, a secure partner responds with curiosity, not defensiveness. What feels off? Let's talk about it. Help me understand your concern. A manipulative partner, on the other hand, turns your concern into a character flaw. You're too sensitive. You're too suspicious. You're too demanding. You're too emotional. You're too much. Here's a hard truth. If he's telling you you're overreacting, it's usually because you're reacting exactly the right amount to something he doesn't want you to examine closely. Think about all the times in your life when you ignored your intuition. Maybe it was a friend who turned out to be untrustworthy. Maybe it was a business deal that went sour. Maybe it was a situation that felt unsafe. When you look back, can you identify the moment when you knew something was wrong? When your gut screamed at you to pay attention? When your intuition was waving red flags? And can you identify the moment when you talked yourself out of trusting that instinct? For most women, especially women of a certain generation, we've been conditioned our entire lives not to trust ourselves. We've been told we're too emotional, too irrational, too unstable to trust our own judgment. We've been taught to defer to male authority, male logic, male interpretation of reality. We've been socialized to doubt ourselves, to second-guess ourselves, to prioritize being nice over being safe. This conditioning runs deep. It's in the water we've been swimming in our entire lives. It takes conscious, deliberate effort to unlearn it. Dr. Christiane Northrup, a physician who has written extensively about women's health and intuition, explains that women's intuition is often strongest in middle age and beyond. Why? Because we have decades of experience reading people, navigating complex social situations, and detecting deception. We've seen patterns play out. We know how stories end. We've accumulated wisdom. Our intuition at 60 is infinitely more refined than it was at 20. So why would you ignore it now when it's at its peak power? Eleanor eventually recovered from her experience with Martin, but not without scars. The money was gone. That was one thing, but the deeper wound was to her sense of self. She had prided herself on being savvy, on being intelligent, on having good judgment. Martin had made her doubt all of that. It took her 2 years of therapy to rebuild her confidence in her own perceptions. The worst part, Eleanor told me, wasn't that he lied. It was that I knew he was lying and I let him convince me I was wrong. I betrayed myself. I abandoned myself. I knew better and I didn't act on it. That's the real cost of ignoring your intuition. It's not just about this man, this situation. It's about your relationship with yourself. Every time you ignore your intuition to please someone else, you're telling yourself that his comfort is more important than your safety. You're training yourself not to trust the very tool that has evolved to protect you. Here's what I want you to do. The next time a man tells you you're overreacting, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, am I actually overreacting or am I reacting appropriately to something real? Am I being irrational or am I picking up on something that my conscious mind hasn't fully articulated yet? Then instead of immediately apologizing or backing down or doubting yourself, say this: I'm noticing something that concerns me. I need to trust my perceptions. If you can help me understand what I'm sensing, I'm willing to listen, but I'm not willing to be told that my concerns are invalid. Watch what happens. A secure, honest man will engage. He'll want to understand your concern. He'll work with you to address it. He'll respect that your instincts are valuable. An insecure or dishonest man will escalate. He'll get angry. He'll accuse you of being difficult. He'll turn it around on you. He'll make you the problem. That response tells you everything you need to know. Your intuition is not your enemy. It's your ally. It has kept you safe for over 60 years. It has guided you through countless decisions, relationships, and situations. It has earned your trust. Don't abandon it now for a man who wants you to doubt yourself. Don't let anyone convince you that your perceptions are faulty, that your concerns are silly, that your instincts are wrong. You know things. You sense things. You understand things. Trust that. And if trusting yourself means losing him, then he's the price you pay for keeping yourself. That's a trade worth making every single time. Thing number 4, never accept financial dependence or allow him to control your money. Money is power. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either naive or trying to disempower you. And at 60 plus, with decades of financial experience behind you, giving up financial autonomy to a man is not romantic, it's not trusting, it's not partnership. It's dangerous. Ruth was 68 and financially secure when she met Kenneth. She had been a financial planner for 40 years. She had investments, retirement accounts, a paid-off house, and substantial savings. She knew money. She understood money. She had helped hundreds of clients protect and grow their wealth. Kenneth was charming, attentive, and about 15 years younger. He had recently gone through a divorce, he said, which had left him financially devastated. His ex-wife had taken everything. He was starting over. Ruth, successful and generous, wanted to help. It started small. He moved into her house to save money. That made sense. She had plenty of room. Why should he pay rent elsewhere? Then he suggested they open a joint account for shared expenses. That seemed reasonable. They were building a life together. Of course, they should share expenses, except the money flowing into the joint account was all hers, and the money flowing out was going to his expenses, his car payment, his credit card bills, his business ventures that always seemed to be on the verge of paying off, but never did. Ruth noticed. Of course she did. She was a financial professional. But Kenneth had an explanation for everything. "I'm just going through a rough patch. My big deal is about to close, and then I'll pay you back double." I thought, we were a team. Don't you trust me? I thought you loved me. The gaslighting was subtle but effective. Every time Ruth raised a concern about money, Kenneth made it about love, about trust, about partnership. He made her feel petty for caring about money. He made her feel selfish for not wanting to support him. He made her feel like a bad partner for keeping track. 2 years later, Ruth's savings were depleted. Her retirement accounts had been raided for emergencies. She had taken out a second mortgage on her paid-off house to fund his various business schemes, none of which had paid off. She had co-signed loans that he defaulted on, destroying her credit. At 70, Ruth was working part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet, while Kenneth had moved on to another woman. Financial abuse is real, it's common, and it's devastating. And it's particularly insidious with older women because we're often dealing with fixed incomes, retirement savings that can't be replenished, and decades of accumulated wealth that can be drained in a matter of months. Dr. Jill Gross, who studies financial abuse in older populations, found that women over 60 are particularly vulnerable to financial exploitation by romantic partners. Why? Several reasons. First, many older women were raised in an era when men handled the money, so they may defer to male partners on financial decisions despite having their own financial experience. Second, older women often have substantial assets, savings, and property, making them attractive targets. Third, societal messages tell older women they should be grateful for male attention, making them less likely to question a partner's financial behavior. The statistics are horrifying. The National Adult Protective Services Association estimates that older adults lose approximately $3 billion annually to financial exploitation, and romantic partners are one of the most common perpetrators. Here's what psychologists have identified as the warning signs of financial abuse. He's overly interested in your finances early in the relationship, asking detailed questions about your assets, your income, your retirement accounts, your property. This isn't normal getting to know you conversation. This is reconnaissance. He has a financial crisis shortly after meeting you. His car breaks down. He loses his job. He has medical bills. He's about to lose his apartment. These crises create urgency and appeal to your compassion. He suggests combining finances quickly, joint accounts, shared credit cards, adding him to your house title, co-signing loans. Legitimate partners don't rush financial entanglement. He's vague about his own finances. You know everything about your financial situation, but his is always murky. He's waiting for money from a lawsuit. He has assets tied up in complex investments. He's expecting an inheritance. Nothing is ever concrete. He makes financial decisions without consulting you. Suddenly, there are charges on the joint account you didn't authorize. Money has been moved from your savings. He's made purchases in your name. He gets angry or defensive when you ask questions about money. He accuses you of not trusting him, of being controlling, of being materialistic. He isolates you from financial advisors or family members who might question the arrangement. He suggests you don't need your financial advisor anymore because he can handle it. He's offended when your children ask questions about the financial arrangements. Dr. Mary Lund, who works with victims of financial abuse, emphasizes that financial abuse is rarely about the money itself. It's about control, Money is power, and controlling your money means controlling you. It means you can't leave. It means you're dependent. It means you've lost your autonomy. Let's talk about the psychology of why intelligent, financially savvy women like Ruth fall for this. It's not because they're stupid or naive. It's because they're human, and humans are susceptible to specific psychological manipulations. The foot in the door technique. Start with small requests that seem reasonable. Borrow $20, stay over a few nights. Use your car occasionally. Each concession makes the next one easier to agree to. The reciprocity principle. He's given you attention, affection, companionship, things you value. You feel obligated to give back. He makes sure you know he can't give money, so you give money on his behalf. The sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested so much financially and emotionally. Walking away now means admitting it was all a mistake. So you invest more, hoping to recoup your losses. Love bombing and intermittent reinforcement. He showers you with affection and attention, then withdraws it. He's grateful and loving when you help financially, cold when you hesitate. This creates an addiction-like pattern where you keep trying to get back to those moments of warmth, shame, and secrecy. He makes sure you're embarrassed about the situation. You don't want your kids to know. You don't want your friends to find out. Shame keeps you trapped. Here's what you need to understand. Financial autonomy is not negotiable. It doesn't matter how much you love him. It doesn't matter how long you've been together. It doesn't matter how old-fashioned it seems to keep separate finances. Your financial independence is your life raft. It's your safety net. It's your freedom. Dr. Suze Orman, the financial advisor who has spent decades helping women achieve financial independence, has a simple rule. No joint accounts, no co-signing, no lending money, no paying his bills until you're legally married, and even then, maintain separate accounts for your own assets. This isn't about lack of trust. This is about protecting yourself. Because here's a brutal truth. If the relationship ends, you need to be able to survive. If he's controlling all the money, if you're financially dependent, if your assets are entangled, with his, leaving becomes exponentially harder. And let's address the elephant in the room. If he truly loves you, he will not want you to be financially vulnerable. A man who loves you wants you to be secure. He wants you to be protected. He wants you to have resources and options. He's not threatened by your financial independence. He celebrates it. Ruth's recovery was long and painful. She had to file for bankruptcy. She lost her house. She had to move in with her daughter and son-in-law. At 72, she was essentially starting over financially. The money was devastating, she told me. But the worst part was realizing that I, who had spent my entire career teaching people how to protect their assets, had given mine away to a con artist. I was so ashamed. I felt so stupid. But Ruth wasn't stupid. She was human. She was lonely. She wanted companionship. She wanted love. And Kenneth identified those vulnerabilities and exploited them with surgical precision. Here's your action. Plan for financial protection. Never combine finances until marriage, and even then, maintain separate accounts for your pre-existing assets. Never co-sign loans or credit cards. Never give access to your accounts, your passwords, your credit cards. Never allow a partner to make financial decisions without your full understanding and agreement. Always maintain your own credit. Always maintain accounts in your own name. Consult with a financial advisor and an attorney before making any major financial decisions that involve a partner. Be wary of any partner who pressures you financially, who's vague about his own finances, who has constant crises, who suggests you're not being a good partner if you don't help him financially. Tell trusted family members or friends about any significant financial arrangements with a partner. Secrecy is the friend of financial abuse. If you're already in a situation where you've become financially entangled and you're realizing it's not healthy, seek help immediately. Talk to a financial advisor who specializes in untangling complex financial situations. Talk to an attorney. Talk to adult protective services if necessary. Get out before more damage is done. Your money represents decades of work, sacrifice, careful planning, and discipline. It represents your security, your independence, your options, your future. It is not a demonstration of love to give it away. It is not selfish to protect it. It is not a lack of trust to maintain boundaries around it. A man who asks you to compromise your financial security doesn't love you. He's using you, and you deserve so much better than that. Thing number 5, never tolerate disrespect under the guise of honesty or jokes. At 61, Diane had thick skin. She had survived a challenging corporate career in a male-dominated industry. She had raised teenagers. She had weathered criticism, endured difficult people, and developed a reputation for being someone who didn't take things too personally. So when Marcus made his first joke about her weight at a dinner party, she laughed it off. When he said she was starting to look her age and maybe should consider Botox, she rolled her eyes. When he commented on what she was eating, suggesting she didn't need dessert, she told herself he was just concerned about her health. When he critiqued her clothes, her hair, her makeup, her opinions, her friends, her interests, she told herself he was just being honest. He was just telling her things other people thought but were too polite to say. He was just trying to help her be better. Within 6 months, Diane's self-esteem was destroyed. She stood in front of her mirror every morning finding flaws. She second-guessed every outfit. She apologized for her opinions before expressing them. She stopped eating in front of him. She declined social invitations because she was anxious about what he might say in front of others. Then her daughter said something that changed everything. "Mom, I don't recognize you anymore. You used to be so confident. Now you apologize for existing. What has he done to you?" What he had done was systematically dismantle her self-worth under the guise of honesty and humor. This is verbal and emotional abuse. Full stop. And it's not funny, it's not honest, it's not helpful, it's destructive, it's calculated, and it's designed to keep you small, insecure, and dependent. Dr. Patricia Evans, who has written extensively about verbal abuse, identifies several categories of abusive communication disguised as something else. Joking abuse. He makes cutting remarks about your appearance, your intelligence, your age, your body, then tells you you're too sensitive when you're hurt. It was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? Honest criticism. He constantly points out your flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings, framing it as helping you improve. "I'm just being honest. Don't you want to know the truth?" Concerned commentary. He criticizes your choices, your habits, your lifestyle under the guise of caring about your well-being. "I'm just worried about you. I'm just trying to help." Public humiliation. He embarrasses you in front of others, then dismisses your hurt as overreacting. "Everyone thought it was funny. Why are you making such a big deal?" Comparison. He constantly compares you unfavorably to other women, to your younger self, to some imaginary ideal. "She's your age and she looks great. Why don't you make an effort like that?" Here's what research tells us about the impact of this kind of communication. Dr. John Gottman identified criticism and contempt as 2 of the 4 horsemen that predict relationship failure. But they don't just predict relationship failure. They predict psychological damage to the person on the receiving end. Constant criticism changes your brain. Neuroscience research shows that repeated negative messages create neural pathways that become your internal voice. When you're constantly told you're not good enough, not attractive enough, not smart enough, your brain begins to believe it. This isn't weakness. This is neurology. Dr. Carol McBride, who specializes in the long-term effects of emotional abuse, explains that this kind of treatment creates what she calls complex PTSD. You become hyper-vigilant, constantly monitoring yourself for flaws, anticipating criticism, trying to preempt his displeasure. You live in a state of low-grade anxiety. You lose your sense of self. And here's the insidious part. He's trained you to police yourself. He doesn't have to criticize you anymore because you're doing it for him. You've internalized his voice. You've made his cruelty your own. Let's be very clear about something. There's a difference between feedback and abuse. Feedback is specific, constructive, and delivered with kindness. I noticed you've seemed stressed lately. Is there anything I can do to help? That's feedback from a place of caring. Abuse is general, destructive, and delivered with contempt. You're always stressed out. You need to get it together. You're a mess. That's abuse from a place of superiority. Feedback addresses a behavior and offers solutions. I felt hurt when you canceled our plans at the last minute. Next time, could you give me more notice? That's feedback that respects both people. Abuse attacks character and offers nothing but criticism. You're so unreliable. You always do this. You're selfish. That's abuse that tears down. Feedback is invited or at least appropriate to the situation. If you ask him how an outfit looks and he gives an honest opinion, that's feedback. If he constantly comments on your appearance without being asked, that's abuse. Feedback respects boundaries. If you say, "That comment hurt me," and he apologizes and stops, that's respectful communication. If you say, "That comment hurt me," and he tells you you're too sensitive, that's abuse. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, who has worked with abusive men for decades, explains that abusers often frame their abuse as a virtue. They're just honest. They tell it like it is. They're not fake like everyone else. This allows them to abuse you while simultaneously claiming moral superiority. But honesty without kindness is cruelty. Truth without compassion is violence. And someone who is consistently unkind to you, regardless of how they frame it, does not love you. Love is kind. Love is gentle. Love builds up. Love protects your dignity. Think about how you talk to the people you love. Do you constantly point out their flaws? Do you make jokes at their expense? Do you criticize their appearance? No, because love doesn't do that. Love sees the best. Love celebrates. Love encourages. If he's treating you in a way you would never treat someone you love, that tells you something crucial about how he feels about you. Diane's turning point came when she attended her granddaughter's school play. Her granddaughter played a tree. It wasn't a big role, but the little girl was so proud. Afterward, Diane heard herself say to her granddaughter, "That was wonderful, sweetie. You were the best tree I've ever seen. You should be so proud of yourself." Then she realized she would never say to her granddaughter, "You know, you weren't as good as the other trees. You should try harder." That costume wasn't very flattering. She would never dream of crushing her granddaughter's joy with criticism disguised as honesty. So why was she accepting that treatment from Marcus? Why was she letting him speak to her in ways she would never accept someone speaking to her granddaughter? That realization gave her the courage to end the relationship. When she told Marcus it was over and explained why, his response was predictable. "You're too sensitive. You can't take any feedback. You're going to end up alone because no one can be honest with you." Diane said, "I'd rather be alone than be with someone who makes me feel worthless. And what you call honesty, I call cruelty. I'm done." Here's your guideline. If his honesty consistently makes you feel bad about yourself, it's not honesty, it's abuse. If his jokes consistently target your insecurities, they're not jokes, they're attacks. If his concern consistently undermines your confidence, it's not concern, it's control. You are over 60 years old. You have earned the right to be spoken to with respect. You have earned the right to dignity. You have earned the right to kindness. Any man who cannot speak to you with respect is a man you should remove from your life. It doesn't matter how he frames it. It doesn't matter what excuses he makes. It doesn't matter how charming he is at other times. Consistent disrespect is not something you compromise on. It's not something you tolerate. It's not something you accept in exchange for companionship or financial security or the status of being in a relationship. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your self-worth is not up for debate. Your value is not dependent on his approval. And if he can't see your worth, if he can't appreciate who you are, if he can't treat you with the respect you deserve, that's not a reflection of your value. That's a reflection of his character. Let him go. You deserve better. You deserve kindness. You deserve someone who speaks to you the way you speak to people you love, with gentleness, with encouragement, with respect. Thing number 6. Never sacrifice your autonomy by allowing him to make your decisions. Marjorie was 66 and had always been decisive. She had run a successful real estate agency for 30 years. She had made countless major decisions, business decisions, financial decisions, parenting decisions, life decisions. She was known for her judgment, her confidence, her ability to assess situations and make sound choices. Then she met Donald, and slowly, imperceptibly, she stopped making decisions. It started innocuously. They were planning a vacation. Donald had strong opinions about where they should go. Marjorie had ideas too, but Donald's enthusiasm was infectious, and honestly, it was nice to have someone else take charge for once. So they went where he wanted to go. Then it was restaurants. He always seemed to know what was good, what was worth trying. Marjorie found herself deferring to his choices. It was easier. It made him happy. What did it matter? Then it was bigger things. Her daughter needed advice about her marriage. Marjorie started to share her thoughts, but Donald interrupted. "Here's what you should tell her," he said, and proceeded to outline what Marjorie should say. And Marjorie, bizarrely, found herself repeating his advice to her daughter instead of sharing her own wisdom. When Marjorie mentioned she was thinking about selling her agency and retiring, Donald had opinions about when she should do it, how she should do it, what she should do with the proceeds. Marjorie found her decisions shifting to align with his preferences, his timeline, his vision for their future. Within 2 years, Marjorie barely recognized herself. She couldn't remember the last time she had made a decision without consulting Donald. She couldn't remember the last time she had trusted her own judgment. She had become a passenger in her own life. The wake-up call came when her son confronted her. "Mom, you used to have opinions about everything. You used to make decisions and stick to them. Now you don't do anything without checking with Donald first. What happened to you?" What happened was that Marjorie had gradually surrendered her autonomy, and she hadn't even realized she was doing it. Dr. Laura Doyle, who has studied relationship dynamics, identifies this pattern as learned helplessness in decision-making. It's when a capable, intelligent person gradually stops trusting their own judgment and defers to someone else. It's particularly common in older women who have been socialized to believe that having a man's input makes decisions more legitimate, more valid, more secure. But here's the truth: your judgment hasn't diminished. Your capacity for decision-making hasn't eroded. You haven't suddenly become less capable. What's happened is that you've been conditioned to doubt yourself, and simultaneously, you've been relieved of the burden of decision-making. And that relief, that sense of not having to be responsible, can be seductive. Dr. Carol Gilligan, who has studied women's psychology and decision-making for decades, found that women often face what she calls silencing of self in relationships. We suppress our own thoughts, our own preferences, our own decision-making processes to accommodate our partners, not because we're weak, but because we've been socialized to believe that good partners are accommodating, flexible, willing to compromise. But there's a difference between compromise and surrender. Compromise is when both people give a little to reach a solution that works for both. Surrender is when one person consistently gives up their preferences, their judgment, their decisions to please the other. Here's what happens psychologically when you stop making your own decisions. Dr. Martin Seligman's research on learned helplessness found that when people feel they have no control over outcomes, they stop trying to exert control. They become passive. They become dependent. They lose confidence in their ability to affect their circumstances. And this has cascading effects. When you stop making decisions in your relationship, you start doubting your decision-making ability in other areas. If you can't be trusted to choose a restaurant, can you be trusted to make a financial decision? If your judgment about vacation destinations is suspect, is your judgment about your health reliable? This erosion of confidence is not accidental. Whether conscious or not, when a partner consistently undermines your decision-making, takes over your choices, or makes you doubt your judgment, they are gaining power and control. They're making themselves indispensable. They're making you dependent. Dr. Harriet Lerner points out that one of the key markers of a healthy relationship is that both partners maintain their capacity for independent thought and decision-making. You should be able to make decisions on your own. You should be able to trust your own judgment. You should be able to act without needing approval or validation from your partner. This doesn't mean you don't consult each other. This doesn't mean you don't consider each other's preferences. This doesn't mean you don't collaborate on decisions that affect both of you. It means you retain your agency. You retain your autonomy. You retain your confidence in your own mind. Think about it this way. You've been making decisions for over 60 years. You've navigated a career, raised children, managed a household, dealt with crises, solved problems. You've made thousands of decisions, and you're still here. Your judgment has served you well. Why would you suddenly need someone else to make decisions for you now? The answer is you don't. But if you've fallen into this pattern, you need to actively reclaim your autonomy. Marjorie's process of reclaiming her decision-making ability was uncomfortable. The first time she made plans without consulting Donald, he was upset. "I thought we made decisions together," he said. Marjorie replied, "We do make some decisions together, but this decision was mine to make and I made it." He didn't like it. He sulked. He made passive-aggressive comments, but Marjorie held firm. She started small. She chose the restaurant. She planned a weekend visit to see her sister without asking his permission. She made a financial decision about her retirement account. She offered advice to her daughter based on her own wisdom, not his. Each time she made a decision independently, she felt stronger. Each time she trusted her own judgment, her confidence grew. Each time she acted without his approval, she reclaimed a piece of herself. Donald struggled with this. He was accustomed to being in charge. He liked being the decision maker. He found Marjorie's growing independence threatening. Eventually, he gave her an ultimatum. Things go back to the way they were, or the relationship was over. Marjorie chose herself. She chose her autonomy, and she discovered something profound. She didn't need him. She had been capable all along. She had simply forgotten. Here's your action plan for reclaiming your autonomy. Start noticing when you defer decisions to your partner. Keep track. How often do you say whatever you think, or you decide, or what do you want to do? Identify areas where you've surrendered decision-making. Are there topics where you used to trust your judgment but now always consult him? Career decisions, financial decisions, health decisions, decisions about your family. Start small. Make one decision a day without consulting him. What to wear, what to have for lunch, what to watch, what to read. Small decisions build the muscle of autonomy. Reclaim your expertise. In areas where you have knowledge and experience, Trust yourself. You don't need his validation. You don't need his approval. You know what you're doing. Practice saying, "I've decided," instead of "I was thinking maybe," or "Would it be okay if?" You're not asking permission. You're informing. Notice his reaction. Does he support your autonomy? Does he celebrate your confidence? Or does he resist, sulk, punish, criticize? His reaction tells you everything about whether this relationship supports your growth or requires your diminishment. Reconnect with your own values and preferences. Maybe you've been deferring to him for so long, you've lost touch with what you actually want. Spend time reconnecting with yourself. What do you value? What do you enjoy? What matters to you? If you're in a relationship where your partner consistently undermines your decision-making, controls your choices, or makes you feel incompetent, you need to address it directly. I've noticed that I've stopped trusting my own judgment, and I need to reclaim that. I need to make my own decisions. I need you to support my autonomy, not undermine it. If he can't do that, if he needs you to be dependent and indecisive to feel secure, then he's not a healthy partner for you. You are not diminished by age. Your judgment is not less sound because you're 60-something instead of 30-something. Your decision-making capacity hasn't eroded. If anything, it's stronger, more refined, more informed by decades of experience. Trust yourself. You've earned that trust. You've proven yourself capable thousands of times over. Don't let anyone, not even someone who claims to love you, take that away from you. Your autonomy is sacred. Protect it fiercely. Thing number 7, never ignore abuse because you fear being alone. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking pattern I see in women over 60, and it's the one that can have the most devastating consequences. It's the woman who stays with a man who is cruel, who is abusive, who is harmful, because she has internalized the message that being alone is worse than being abused. Let me tell you about Evelyn. At 70, Evelyn had been with Frank for 8 years. Frank was verbally abusive. He called her names. He berated her in front of others. He controlled her movements, monitored her phone calls, isolated her from her family. He had never hit her, she told me, as if that made it acceptable. He had never physically harmed her, as if psychological abuse wasn't harm. Evelyn's children begged her to leave. Her friends expressed concern. Her doctor noticed signs of anxiety and depression. Everyone in Evelyn's life could see what was happening. Everyone except Evelyn, or rather, Evelyn saw it, but she had decided that being with Frank, even though Frank was terrible, was better than being alone. "I'm 70 years old," she told me. "Who's going to want me now? At least with Frank, I have someone. At least I'm not alone." This belief that being abused is preferable to being alone is one of the most toxic messages our society has fed to women, and it's particularly insidious for older women because we've been told our entire lives that our value is in being partnered, that we're incomplete without a man, that being alone is a failure, something to be pitied, something to be avoided at all costs. So we pay the cost. And the cost is ourselves. Dr. Lenore Walker, who first identified battered woman syndrome, explains that victims of abuse often develop a psychological phenomenon where they believe they cannot leave. It's not because they're weak or stupid. It's because abuse systematically breaks down your sense of self, your confidence, your belief in your ability to survive without the abuser. The abuse cycle is well documented. Tension building, incident, reconciliation, calm. During the reconciliation and calm phases, he's apologetic, loving, promises to change. You see glimpses of the man you thought he was. You convince yourself it's getting better. Then the cycle starts again. But here's what's crucial to understand. It doesn't get better. Abuse escalates. It doesn't stay at the same level. It intensifies over time. Dr. Evan Stark, who studies coercive control, explains that abuse is rarely just about isolated incidents. It's about a pattern of behavior designed to dominate, control, and disempower. It's about systematically taking away your autonomy, your confidence, your resources, your support system, until you feel you have no choice but to stay. And society's messages to older women make this worse. We're told that at our age, we should be grateful for any companionship, that our options are limited, that we're too old to start over, that being alone at our age is sad, pathetic, a sign of failure. These messages are lies, vicious, destructive lies, designed to keep women compliant, tolerant of mistreatment, afraid to demand better. Here's the truth: being alone is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Being with someone who abuses you is worse. Being with someone who diminishes you is worse. Being with someone who makes you feel worthless is worse. Being with someone who takes away your dignity is worse. Loneliness is uncomfortable. Abuse is devastating. Loneliness is temporary. Abuse has long-lasting psychological and sometimes physical consequences. Loneliness can be addressed through community, friendships, activities, purpose. Abuse requires escape and often professional intervention to recover from. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who has studied trauma for decades, explains that being in an abusive relationship creates complex trauma that affects your nervous system, your brain structure, your ability to regulate emotions, your sense of self. The longer you stay, the deeper the damage. Let me be very clear about what constitutes abuse, because many women don't recognize it unless it's physical. Physical abuse: hitting, pushing, restraining, any unwanted physical contact. Verbal abuse: name-calling, insults, constant criticism, yelling, threats. Emotional abuse: manipulation, gaslighting, undermining your confidence, making you doubt yourself. Financial abuse: controlling your money, preventing you from accessing your own resources, stealing from you. Social abuse: isolating you from friends and family, monitoring your communications, controlling where you go and who you see. Sexual abuse: any sexual activity you don't consent to, any coercion around sex, any use of sex to control or punish. Psychological abuse: intimidation, threats, making you afraid, destroying your belongings, threatening pets or loved ones. If you're experiencing any of these, you're being abused. It doesn't matter if he's nice sometimes. It doesn't matter if he says he loves you. It doesn't matter if he apologizes. Abuse is abuse. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, in his book, Why Does He Do That?, explains that abusive men don't abuse because they lose control. They abuse because they want control. They don't abuse because they have anger problems. They abuse because they believe they have the right to control their partner. They don't abuse because you provoke them. They abuse because they choose to. Nothing you do causes his abuse. Nothing you do can fix his abuse. You cannot love him into changing. You cannot be perfect enough to stop the abuse. You cannot manage his emotions for him. The only person who can stop the abuse is him, and the only way you can be safe is to leave. I know that's terrifying. I know it feels impossible. I know you have 1,000 reasons why you can't leave. Let me address the most common ones. I'm too old to start over. No, you're not. Women start over at 70, 80, 90. It's never too late to claim a life of peace and dignity. I have nowhere to go. There are resources. Domestic violence shelters, friends, family, churches, community organizations, adult protective services. You have options. I can't afford it. Abuse is expensive. Medical bills, mental health treatment, replacing destroyed belongings. Freedom might be financially difficult, but it's worth it, and there are resources to help. He needs me. He doesn't need you. He needs control over you. Those are not the same thing. I still love him. Love doesn't require you to endure abuse. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your safety and well-being. You can love someone from a distance, from safety, from a life that doesn't include them. What will people think? People who judge you for leaving an abusive relationship are not people whose opinions matter. Anyone who truly cares about you will support you leaving. He's promised to change. How many times has he promised? Has anything actually changed? Abusers often promise to change during the reconciliation phase. It's part of the cycle. Real change requires sustained effort, usually professional help, and months or years of consistent, different behavior. It's not that bad. If you're thinking this, it's bad enough. You don't have to wait until it's bad enough to leave. You don't have to earn the right to safety by enduring enough abuse first. I'm embarrassed that I ended up in this situation. Abuse is not your fault. You didn't create it. You didn't cause it. You don't have anything to be embarrassed about. He should be embarrassed, not you. Evelyn eventually left Frank. It took a crisis, a particularly bad incident, where Frank became physically violent for the first time. Evelyn ended up in the hospital. Her daughter picked her up from the hospital and took her home, to her daughter's home, and refused to let her go back. The first month was hell for Evelyn. She was trauma-bonded to Frank. She missed him. She worried about him. She second-guessed her decision. She thought about going back, but her daughter, her friends, and a domestic violence counselor held space for her. They reminded her of who she was before Frank. They reminded her of his abusive behaviors. They supported her through the withdrawal from the relationship, because that's what it was, a withdrawal from an addiction. 6 months later, Evelyn said something profound. I didn't realize how much space fear was taking up in my body until it was gone. I didn't realize that the tightness in my chest, the knot in my stomach, the constant vigilance wasn't normal. I thought that's just what life was. Now I wake up and my first thought isn't, what mood is he in? What did I do wrong? How do I avoid setting him off? I wake up and I'm just peaceful. I didn't even remember what peace felt like. That's what's on the other side of leaving. Peace. Not necessarily happiness immediately, not necessarily ease immediately, not necessarily a perfect life, but peace. The peace that comes from no longer living in fear. The peace that comes from no longer being diminished. The peace that comes from reclaiming your dignity. Here's what I need you to hear. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve to live without fear. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve dignity. And if those things are not present in your relationship, then the relationship needs to end, not tomorrow, not when circumstances are better, not when you're strong enough, now, because every day you stay is another day of harm, another day of damage, another day stolen from the peaceful life you deserve. Being alone at 60, 70, 80 is not a tragedy. Being abused at any age is. If you're reading this and you're in an abusive relationship, please reach out for help. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Contact Adult Protective Services in your area. Tell your doctor, tell a friend, tell someone, break the silence. Silence keeps you trapped. You are strong enough to leave. You are brave enough to leave. You are worthy of a life without abuse. And when you do leave, when you're on the other side, you'll understand. Being alone isn't lonely when you're finally at peace with yourself. Being alone isn't sad when you're no longer afraid. Being alone isn't failure when you've chosen dignity over desperation. You are enough all by yourself. You always have been. We've covered 7 things you should never do for a man. Let's recap briefly. Never diminish your accomplishments to make him feel bigger. Your success is not threatening. It's evidence of your excellence. Never abandon your friendships to prioritize his need for attention. Your friendships are essential to your health and well-being. Never ignore your intuition because he tells you you're overreacting. Your instincts have kept you safe for 60+ years. Trust them. Never accept financial dependence or allow him to control your money. Financial autonomy is power. Guard it fiercely. Never tolerate disrespect under the guise of honesty or jokes. Kindness is not optional in love. Neither is respect. Never sacrifice your autonomy by allowing him to make your decisions. Your judgment is sound. Your capacity for decision-making is intact. Trust yourself. Never ignore abuse because you fear being alone. Being alone is not the worst thing. Being abused is worse. You deserve peace. These 7 principles are not about being difficult. They're not about being unwilling to compromise. They're not about being selfish or demanding or high maintenance. They're about maintaining your dignity. They're about protecting your well-being. They're about insisting on basic respect, kindness, and equality in your relationships. And here's the beautiful truth that nobody tells you. When you hold these boundaries, when you refuse to compromise on these principles, when you insist on being treated with the dignity you deserve, you don't have to settle for less. The right man, a healthy man, a secure man, will meet you at this standard. He'll celebrate your success. He'll encourage your friendships. He'll respect your intuition. He'll support your financial independence. He'll speak to you with kindness. He'll honor your autonomy. He'll never, ever abuse you. And if you don't find that man, if you end up single, you'll still have something infinitely more valuable: yourself. Whole, intact, dignified, and free. At 60, 70, 80, you have earned the right to live life on your terms. You have earned the right to be selective about who gets access to your time, your energy, your love. You have earned the right to high standards and firm boundaries. Do not let anyone convince you that your age makes you less worthy of love, respect, and dignity. Do not let anyone convince you that you should be grateful for whatever crumbs of affection you can get. Do not let anyone convince you that being in a relationship, any relationship, is better than being single. You are magnificent. You are wise. You are powerful. You have survived and thrived through decades of life. You have loved and lost and learned and grown. You have weathered storms that would have broken weaker people. You have earned your place in this world. Hold your head high. Draw your boundaries firmly. Demand the respect you deserve. And never, ever settle for less than your worth. If this message resonated with you, please take a moment right now to like this video. It really does help other women find this content. Comment below with your thoughts, your experiences, your wisdom. Your voice matters, and other women need to hear it. Share this video with the women in your life who need to hear this truth. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in empowering women to live authentically, powerfully, and beautifully at every age. And if you want to support the work we're doing here, if you believe in creating content that challenges society's toxic messages about aging women, if you want to help us continue producing videos that empower and educate, please consider supporting this channel with super thanks. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps us continue this work. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to question the narratives you've been sold. Thank you for believing that you deserve better. You do. You absolutely do. Until next time, hold your boundaries, trust your worth, and never forget, you are enough exactly as you are.